Hello, my name is Michael Lavica. Today's presentation is on taking calcium and vitamin D for osteoporosis. Before we get started, I'd like to thank Elaine Henderson and the Bone Buddies for allowing me to present out to them. It's quite the honor to be able to do so. Okay, let's get started. The first thing I need to do is acknowledge these two doctors, Dr. John Bilezikian and Dr. Fredric Coe. These doctors are world-renowned in their fields. Dr. Bilezikian for endocrinology with specialization in osteoporosis, and Dr. Fredric Coe, who's world-renowned for nephrology, that's work with the kidneys. All right, so let's walk through the agenda. The first thing we're going to look at is how your bones interact with both calcium and vitamin D. Then we're going to take a look at how calcium is controlled in your body. It's very important. Then we'll take a look at calcium and vitamin D intake levels. How much should you be taking every day? And how to check whether you're getting enough. Then we're going to talk about the two most prevalent calcium disorders, hyperparathyroidism and hypercalciuria. Both of those can cause osteoporosis, so you need to get this checked out. And then we're going to take a look at the different calcium supplements. So there's a lot of controversy around here and a lot of religion. So we're going to push through that and get the record straight here. And then we'll finish up with just a quick summary, and then I'll stick around to answer all the questions that you guys have. Okay, so here's a drawing of your bones. And your bones will go through this process of repair and replace. And what happens is these osteocytes within your bone will send out a signal that says, hey, I need some repair work done here. And when the signal is sent out, these pre-osteoclasts will start to form, and then they'll mature into full mature osteoclasts, and they will attach to your bone and actually start dissolving bone. So it'll start releasing calcium and phosphorus inside the bone. And then they'll march along your bone, digging out this kind of trench in your bone. And behind that, these things called osteoblasts will start to form. And these osteoblasts will start to kind of rise up and leave behind a collagen matrix. And this collagen matrix will then be mineralized from the blood in circulation that has both calcium and phosphorus in it, and it will start to mineralize this collagen matrix, and you end up with new bone. It's a pretty cool system, and this happens everywhere in your body, tens of thousands of locations at all times. So that's basically how calcium works. At the end of the day, it's there to remineralize the bone after this process happens. Now, vitamin D, the primary use of vitamin D in this whole equation isn't necessarily what I'm going to show you here. It plays more into the regulation of calcium. That said, the osteoclast and the osteoblast use vitamin D. It's kind of like oiling the machine to make sure everything's running okay. That said, if you don't have enough, it can't really work very well. And if you give them too much, then they'll over-dig, right? It overstimulates the osteoclast, and that's bad as well. And we'll get more into those details in a minute. So let's take a look at how calcium works in your system. And what we're going to do is we're going to take 1,000 milligrams in both food and supplements in a 24-hour period. Okay? So when you're taking, maybe 250 in the morning, 250 in the afternoon, 250 at snack, 250 at dinner, whatever the combination is, throughout the day you take that 1,000 milligrams, about 400 milligrams is going to be absorbed into your bloodstream. So it's circulating in your bloodstream throughout the day. But at the same time, your bloodstream will excrete calcium back into your gut, around 200 milligrams. Thereabout. These are just examples. And then the net result is the 800, then, if you do the math here, you end up pooping out, right? Comes out in your stool. So now we have roughly 200 milligrams in any one day that's being circulated, kind of new calcium in our bloodstream. And that calcium will be circulated through the bones. Now in the bones, like I just showed you, right, they're constantly going through this digging and filling and such, and this calcium can be used for that for sure. If you look at I'll call it bone balance, right? How much calcium goes in versus how much calcium comes out. When you're younger, like, in your 20s or teens or whatnot, you have more calcium going in than you have coming out, right? You're building bone, you're growing bigger. When you hit about 30, they're about equal, right? You might have 300 milligrams going in and 300 milligrams coming out. And then as you get older, you actually start to lose calcium, right? You're not absorbing as much as you're kicking out, and you lose bone mass. And that just happens to everyone as you age. So we're going to take an example here of bone balance. So, the amount of calcium coming in is equal to the amount coming out, just for now. And so we have still a net 200 extra milligrams of calcium, right? Since we've absorbed that, and the bones aren't really, they use it, but the net result is you still have 200 milligrams coming out. And that will be excreted through your kidneys. So you'll pee out around 200 milligrams in this example. Obviously, the numbers can fluctuate and such. So that's kind of quickly how the calcium system works. Just a real quick note here that the bone balance, the kind of right-hand side, that's where the osteoporosis medications work. And I have a separate presentation on that. There should be a link that pops up here at the top. I highly recommend you watch that if you're considering osteoporosis medications. Okay. So let's talk about vitamin D. So you can get vitamin D from the sun, and that's how humans have got vitamin D for ages. However, nowadays it's very difficult to get enough vitamin D, an optimal amount of vitamin D, just from the sun. It's very difficult. Most people that aren't supplementing are deficient in vitamin D. But anyway, when you take vitamin D, right, you look at the bottle, it says, vitamin D3, cholecalciferol. That's the same vitamin D3 that you get from the sun hitting your body and converting cholesterol into this cholecalciferol, the same stuff. So you take it, you ingest it, it gets into your bloodstream. There's not really any problem there. And what happens, though, is this version of vitamin D3 isn't really what your body uses. It has to be converted. And it will travel through your liver and be converted into this what's called storage form of vitamin D, 25-OH vitamin D. Now, if you go to the doctor and you say, hey, I want my vitamin D levels checked, this is what they're going to check. This vitamin D will then circulate throughout your blood system, and it gets stored in your fat and your muscles and all over the place. And it's basically ready to use. Now, this vitamin D, while it is the storage form, it is a little bit active. It can affect, receptors in your body. But really what happens is this 25-OH will go through your kidney, and your kidney converts it one more time into what's called the active form of vitamin D, which is 125-OH2 vitamin D. Now, this is the vitamin D that really makes an impact. When it hits your bones, that's what really gets those osteoclasts and osteoblasts working. And there's effects on the gut, and we're going to talk about that in a second. And just throughout your whole body, this is the stuff that really makes an impact. All right, so how is this all regulated? Well, you kind of have this one master control, and it's the parathyroid glands that reside on the backside of your thyroid. They have a sensor, calcium ion sensor, that senses the blood. And if your calcium goes low, it will secrete a parathyroid hormone. So it says, hey, Mike's calcium's low. Let's sound the alarm and send out this parathyroid hormone to try to get that calcium back up where it's supposed to be. And what will happen is this PTH, parathyroid hormone, will travel to your kidneys, and it does two things in the kidneys. The first thing it does is it says, hey, start reclaiming some of that calcium that you would otherwise pee out, right? Oh, I'm low on calcium. Kidneys, do your job. Start recycling some of that calcium, put it back into the bloodstream. Another thing it does is the kidneys will see this and say, oh, okay, well, I'm going to produce the active form of vitamin D because that will help me get more calcium in the body. And how it does it is once it makes this, it will travel to your gut, right, to your stomach. And when your stomach sees this, or your intestines see this, it says, oh, Mike's low on calcium, let's absorb more calcium. So in that last example, remember I had like 400 coming in, 200 going out? Well, maybe it's 500 coming in now, or 600 coming in now, right? This active form of vitamin D does that. It opens up kind of the gates so more calcium can flow in. Okay, and then the last thing that happens, once again, to control your blood calcium, is this active vitamin D and the PTH ends up in your bones, and it tells the bones, hey, start digging harder, right? Give me more of the calcium out of the bone. And at the same time, it'll say, hey, don't use that calcium to mineralize the bone. I need that calcium. Let's pull that out. And this all happens in a very nice fashion, and it's well regulated, and that's why your blood calcium stays in a certain range, and this is a pretty cool system. Now, that said, there are a few things that can go wrong here. And I'm going to walk through, this is going to be a little bit tedious, so I'll try to slow down here a bit. But let's start with a few scenarios. Let's say you've decided, for whatever reasons, I'm not going to take calcium, right? I think my calcium's fine, and I get a glass of milk in the morning, and that's probably plenty good. So I'm getting 200-300 milligrams of calcium, and I think that's just fine. Okay, so what would happen in that case? Well, your blood calcium level is going to start to drop. Your parathyroid gland is going to say, hey, Mike's not getting enough calcium here. Let's turn on the system. So the system goes down to your kidneys, says, hey, start reclaiming, that calcium. Don't pee out, say, 200 milligrams. Let's get back as much as we can there. And then the 125 will be made. The 125 will go to your gut, but you're not taking calcium. It can't absorb more calcium. And don't forget, in the meantime, you're still losing that 200 milligrams back into your gut. So this is kind of a bad scenario here, and your blood system is saying, hey, I need more calcium. So it goes to your bones, and that's where it's going to come from. It's going to dig harder. It's going to not mineralize as much, because it's going to do whatever it has to get the calcium in your blood to a certain level. So this is a bad situation here, right? Your body cannot make calcium. It's got to come from your diet, or it's going to come from your bones, and that's it. Okay, so what about vitamin D? Let's say, I don't need to take vitamin D. I get out in the sun for 10 minutes a day, and I think that's just fine. This is not what I'm going to do. All right, so let's run through that scenario. So let's say you're not taking vitamin D and your calcium goes low. And by the way, your calcium goes low when you're fasting, right? First thing in the morning, your calcium's low, your PTH is going to start to come up, and that's the way the system works. That's fine. But now you're not going to take vitamin D. Calcium goes low. PTH gets generated, goes to your kidneys, right? And your kidneys say, okay, well, I need to convert that storage form of vitamin D into active vitamin D. Oh, shoot, we don't have very much storage form, and it's hard to make active form if you don't have any storage form. So again, both of those together, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to send it to the gut, but it's not going to be enough, and you're not going to absorb more calcium in the gut, even though you're taking plenty of calcium at this point. So again, it's going to go to the bones. Now, the bones aren't getting as much vitamin D as maybe they should, but you know what? PTH is very powerful, and it will dig, and you're going to get calcium from the bone. So again, another bad scenario if you're low in vitamin D. And the opposite is true for both of these, right? If you give too much calcium, you can overwhelm the system. Your blood calcium can start to go up. You'll start peeing out a whole bunch of calcium. That too is not a good situation. And likewise, if you have too much vitamin D, it will overstimulate. It basically runs over the kidneys control, the 125, because 25 is also a little bit active. So it starts absorbing too much calcium from your gut. Your parathyroid hormone is slammed down, but your calcium is going up and up and up, and you overwhelm the osteoclast at the same time, so it's digging. This too is bad for bones. So a lot of things can go wrong here. Let me cover just 3 more. Take a breath. So let's say the parathyroid glands, right, that kick out this parathyroid hormone. let's say they get stuck on, right? For whatever reason, one of them decides it's just going to put out too much parathyroid hormone. Well, what happens is you're sending the signal saying, hey, I need more calcium, and your calcium level will start to rise. So instead of being at 9.5 or 9.6, it creeps up to 9.8, 10, 10.2. I'm going to run through that in a lot of detail here in the later section. So I'm going to stop there for now. But you can tell that would be a bad thing the way the system works. And then finally, what if your kidneys, just for whatever reasons, can't retain calcium? A lot of calcium gets filtered through your kidneys every day, and a lot of it gets reclaimed, but sometimes, there's a problem there. There's an issue there. You can pee out a lot of calcium. And when that happens, it can get to the point where you just flat out can't absorb enough calcium from your gut to compensate. And therefore, it's going to come from your bones. Right? This is hypercalciuria. It's something I have personal knowledge here with a crazy amount of detail. So anyway, so another thing that can go wrong. Now the last thing I'm going to mention, it's kind of that 1 in a million thing, but it is out there. It's a condition called FHH. You can look it up. And it's where the calcium ion sensor gets kind of off, right? There's a handful or quite a few genetic mutations that can happen that kind of affect that calcium ion set point in the parathyroid gland. So again, there's genetic testing for it. And there's conditions to look for this, and your doctor should hopefully know about those. Okay, I know a lot on this slide. We'll slow down a bit here and make it a little bit easier to digest. Pun not intended. All right, so let's talk about calcium and vitamin D intake and blood levels. There's a lot of confusion around here, and let's see if we can't set this straight. So the first thing is vitamin D3, right? When you buy it on the shelf, it'll say vitamin D3, or it might be part of your calcium supplement. It might be included in your orange juice or your milk, and there's lots of places where this thing shows up, so you kind of have to keep an eye on it. But the minimum, well, not the minimum, the recommended daily allowance is around 800 IUs for us, right? And that's kind of this one is kind of a minimum type of thing. Yeah, you're not going to get rickets if you get at least this amount type of thing. But there is a more ideal sweet spot, and I'm going to talk about that coming up here. All right, so hold that for now. All right, so what about that blood test? You go in, you say, doctor, I got to get my 25 or my vitamin D levels checked. Well, this is what they check, the 25-OH-D3. Now, there's a lot of, this is kind of a moving target in a sense that there's a lot of different organizations saying, well, it should be this range, it should be that range. If you look on your blood test, it's going to have this huge range. But the National Institute of Health, they say, look, 20 to 50 nanograms per milliliter is a really good range that you want to be in. Now, I stress the units here because sometimes your blood tests will show it in this nanomoles per liter, which is a different unit, right? The numbers are similar though, so you got to take a look at that, look closely at those units because it makes a big difference. Okay, so now we go to the Endocrine Society, right? These are the endocrinologists, and they're like, yeah, you know what, 40 to 60. We think 40 to 60 is a real good range. And then we look at the Institute of Medicine, and they're like, nah, we think it's 20 to 50, right? And they've also thrown in, hey, if you go above 50, we see some risk of harm here, so we're going to limit it to 50. And then we top that off with all of the osteoporosis studies and clinical trials that I've read through. Before they allow you to participate, they'll make sure you get up to 30 nanograms per milliliter before you can start. And if you're lower than that, they'll give you these, big doses, 10,000 IUs for like a couple of weeks to, get you up there. It's slow moving, so it takes a couple of weeks to really make an impact. And then they'll knock you back down to, some reasonable amount, 2,000 IUs a day or something like that. So that's yet another data point. I'm going to show you a couple more data points here. If you look at this chart here on the lower left, this was from a doctor named Dr. Robert Heaney. He is a very popular guy when it comes to calcium. And what you can look at here is the scale at the bottom where it says serum 25-OH-D. What he tested for was how much calcium can you absorb based on your 25-OH-D levels. And what he saw was as you increase your vitamin D levels, you could absorb more calcium into your gut, right? The vitamin D is helping your gut absorb calcium, just like I showed you on the other drawings. However, once you reach around 80 nanomoles per liter, which is around 32 nanograms per milliliter, then it flattens out. So taking more doesn't help you absorb any more calcium. So that's one data point here, one more clue. Now we have the next chart that shows, again, on the bottom, increasing vitamin D levels, right, this 25-OH, and your parathyroid gland. So your parathyroid, if you have low vitamin D, right, just like I said, you're not going to be able to get calcium like you're supposed to. The parathyroid's going to be high, and it's going to be taking it from your bones. So if you increase your vitamin D to about 30 nanograms per milliliter, then the parathyroid hormone will calm down, right? And you'll be at this nice, steady state point, and it's not overwhelming your bones to get out calcium. So that's another great data point here. And then there's one more here, and I've seen a couple studies on this, where if you don't have enough vitamin D, or if you have too much vitamin D, especially if you have too much vitamin D, it increases your chances of falling. Now, they're not super clear on what's causing this, right? There's some hypotheses on this, like you might not have quite the balance that you might otherwise have. There are some other studies that show that if you have too much vitamin D, it's tougher to build muscle mass. So regardless of the reason, right, maybe you just turn stupid when you get too high in vitamin D. There is this kind of sweet spot that's, again, between this kind of 40, 30, 40 type of range. And when you put this all together, you end up with a 30 to 50 really sounds like a real sweet range to try to get into. And I can confirm that with another training that I was on from a doctor named Heather Hothledge out of UC San Diego. She's an endocrinologist that specializes in osteoporosis. Very good. They have a great center down there. And she said 30 to 50 is her range as well. Now, when you look at your blood test, you say, okay, this sounds great. I'm a believer. I'm going to try to hit 40. All right, let's split this range right in the middle. I mean, you look at your blood test and it says 20 nanograms per milliliter. And you're like, okay, 20. Well, I want to get to 40. How do we get to 40? Okay. Well, John Bilezikian has this great kind of rule of thumb. He says it works really well. And what it is for every 1,000 IUs extra that you take a day, you'll increase your 25-OH by 10. So 10 nanograms per milliliter. So if you're sitting there at 20 and say you're not taking any vitamin D, well, what you want to do is add 2,000 IUs of vitamin D, right? Just take 2 of these 1,000 IU tablets if you want, or pills or whatever, and that will bump you up to 40. Now, it's going to take some time, right? Because it moves slowly. You have a lot of this 25-OH in your body, and you're adding in this other stuff. It's got to be converted, and it takes some time. And it'll take about 2 months for it to settle at the new point. So that's a good time to get your blood retested and see if your 25-OH is where it should be. And that's a great way to be able to tweak this. It also works the other direction as well. I've talked to a lot of people about this, and they'll say, oh, my vitamin D is at 70, right? And I say, okay, 70 is nanograms per milliliter, again, watching the units. 70 is too high, right? Okay. But I'm not taking that much vitamin D. I said, okay, take a look at your bottle. It's like, oh yeah, it just says 2,000. I said, okay, 2,000. Now take a look at your multivitamin. Oh yeah, that says 1,000. Okay, now take a look at your vitamin D that you take. Oh yeah, my vitamin D says my calcium says it's got vitamin D too. So it adds up. It's real easy to take too much vitamin D. On top of that, marketing seems to go crazy with the number. Higher is better, right? No. So if you're at 70 and you want to hit 40, well, just take 3,000 IUs out every day, right? Whatever you're at, add up all the vitamin D that you take in a day, just take out 3,000 IUs per day, and you'll sink down, right, after about 2 months, into that 40 range. Okay. And that's the takeaway here, right? The bottom line is what we're doing here is we're adjusting our vitamin D intake, right? No matter how you get it, you have to adjust that such that your 25-OH ends up in this 30 to 50 range. Now, if for whatever reasons, you're seeing a doctor and it's an oncologist or something, you say, no, I want it in this range here. Hey, listen to them, right? But as far as building bones goes and staying fracture free, this is kind of that sweet spot to be in. All right, so let's shift to calcium. The recommended daily allowance, again, the NIH, is saying 1,200 milligrams per day of calcium, and that's a combination of what you eat in food and what you take in supplements. And if you can get this 2,500 number in just your food, that's fine. You don't have to take any supplements. That's great. Matter of fact, that's kind of the preferred way. But if you can't, because a lot of people, they just don't eat that much dairy, then you want to sprinkle in this calcium from time to time. And that's what I do, right? Like in the morning, I'll have a bowl of cereal with milk, and I'm getting, plenty there. So, but at lunch, I don't drink milk, and I don't eat cheese, too much sodium in cheese for me. So I'll take a 250 milligram calcium pill. And then likewise at dinner, maybe there's cheese on, pizza or cheese on something I'm eating at dinner, I just won't take it. So you kind of have to gauge your diet and supplement where needed. And I put a couple guidelines here so you can kind of see, what contains calcium such. I've actually went through my diet and pulled out the calcium for everything that I eat to try to, figure out exactly how much calcium I'm getting. And I recommend you at least do some of that legwork to make sure you're not getting too much or too little. Now, when you do take calcium supplements, regardless of what they are, or what combination or what label's on there, if you take it with food, it's going to absorb really well. As a matter of fact, if you take it with protein, it'll even absorb better. So you can kind of keep that in mind, but you don't want to take more than, say, 500 or 600 milligrams of calcium at any one time, because your absorption efficiency will drop, right? You won't get that full absorption effect on that 1,200 that you take throughout the day. Okay. All right. So again, this is Dr. Robert Haney, and I guess he passed away a few years ago, but from what I understand, he is the godfather of calcium. Anyway, he did a whole bunch of different experiments in his career, and one of which determined that calcium is a threshold nutrient. So a lot of nutrients are threshold nutrients. And what that means is, the more that you take, the better it is for you, to a point, right? There's some maximum amount, and then at that point, it stops being beneficial. And if you continue to take more, higher doses or whatnot, then it can become detrimental. So Robert Haney did a bunch of experiments to understand how much calcium you could absorb and what was that maximum amount. And for the elderly, right, I put myself in that category, the number that he came up with was 1,400 to 1,600. So 1,500 is about the middle of that. Now I know all the recommendations are 1,200. I'm not sure why they moved down to 1,200. John Bilezikian didn't seem to understand why they did either, but 1,200 is still a really good number. And matter of fact, in the footnotes here, by the way, almost every slide has footnotes. It's a link to the source material for what I'm presenting to you. So you can look all of this stuff up yourself, read through all of the studies. It's actually a lot of fun if you have the time. So anyway, so this is a threshold nutrient, and you don't want to take excessive amounts. Now that said, there are studies out there, right? And you might hear this from, if you have a cardiologist, a heart doctor, they're saying, oh, don't take too much calcium. It's bad for your heart. And it can be, right? It can be if you take way too much. And I put a YouTube link here so you can hear it straight from John Bilezikian, his opinion on this. But what he was saying was all of the studies that he saw that were negative about calcium and heart disease, they were giving the patients 2.5 grams of calcium, right? 2,500 milligrams of calcium. Nobody's recommending you take that much calcium, right? So you're kind of gone over the cliff on this little chart here. But that said, what I've done here is kind of put together just loosely, the first one is probably the best one, which is a mega study of the clinical trials where they went through and looked at, hey, these guys are claiming that calcium causes heart disease, and they go through all the stuff and all the data, and they basically come to the conclusion that, hey, the evidence isn't there to support that, right? And then there's another one here down below that, and down at the bottom there was a study that I had found where they said, yeah, calcium supplements did increase risk of heart disease, but that's when it's not administered with vitamin D, right? So you don't have the vitamin D levels. They don't have to be taken at the same time. We'll talk about that. But if your vitamin D levels are too low and you're taking a bunch of calcium, right, that's not a good thing either. All right, so let's talk about that blood test result. And a lot of people get tripped up here. So when you look at your blood test results, right, it'll say, whatever, let's pick a number, 9.7, so it kind of matches up here. So 9.7, and it says the range is 8.8 to 10.2. Now every lab's going to be a little bit different. These are the Mayo Clinic numbers. But regardless, right, you're going to be in this, more than likely in this zone here somewhere. Now, just because you come in at 9.2 or 9.7, that doesn't mean your calcium next time you check it's going to be at 10.2, or then it's going to be down at 8.8, right? You have what Dr. Bilezikian calls your happy point, right, where your body wants to be. And in this example, it's 9.7, and when you fast, if you don't eat, it might drop down to maybe 9.5, right? But if you eat a whole bunch of food with a lot of calcium, it could creep up to maybe it's 9.9 or something like that. But for the most part, your body is doing everything it can on that diagram that I showed you to keep your calcium at a certain level. Okay, it shouldn't be swinging all over the place. Okay, so pay attention here. This is a big mistake that a lot of people make. They look at their blood test and it says, oh, I'm in range, 9.7. I'm not taking any calcium. So that must mean that I don't need to take calcium, right? That is totally 100% incorrect. Okay, remember, if you're not taking calcium in your diet, if you're not getting enough calcium in your diet, it's going to come from your bones, period, right? There's no other calcium, right? You can't breathe it in, right? This is the only two options to get calcium into your bloodstream. So you can't just look at your number on your test and say, hey, my calcium looks fine, I guess I don't need to take more calcium. Likewise, it doesn't mean if you're taking a whole bunch of calcium and it's setting this range, it's really not going to be dependent, right? If you're taking too much calcium, your body's going to send a signal to your gut saying, hey, stop absorbing so much calcium, and you're going to start urinating out more and more calcium, right? So that's bad as well. But again, your body's really good at trying to maintain that level. Okay, so don't fall for that, right? Help a friend here. Now, and this is different than vitamin D, right? If you take too much vitamin D, your blood test keeps going up and up and up and up. And it will do it, right? You keep taking more, and you can take so much, you can, bad things can really happen if you take way too much vitamin D. So all tests are a bit different, right? They react differently. All right, just a quick note here, and your doctor should be doing this, but it's worth mentioning. John Bilezikian talks about it. It's worth looking at your blood test. So when I say calcium, right, total calcium, and you might have noticed I mentioned calcium ion at some point. Well, the calcium in your blood, in your bloodstream, resides in basically two compartments. One is calcium ion, so it's free calcium. It's just calcium elements floating in your blood, and this is the calcium that's used throughout your body. This is used by your heart, your muscles, and your bones, right? This is the calcium that gets used. The calcium, and that's about half of it. The other half is bound to albumin. It's a protein in your blood called albumin, and it makes up the other half. Now, there are some other kind of compounds that can combine in your bloodstream and then they break apart and such. But regardless, it's about 50-50. So when you get the total calcium and you're using that number to make decisions, it's really kind of an estimate of your calcium ion, which is what you really care about. Now, endocrinologists might measure this calcium ion. I've had calcium ion measured a few times now, just to make sure something isn't wonky going on here. But there's kind of a poor man's way to estimate that calcium ion, and that's using the albumin. If your albumin is, 4, which is pretty much the middle of the range and pretty much where everyone resides type of thing, or 4.1, 4.2, right in that range, then you're in good shape. But if that drops below 4, then you want to correct your calcium. Now let me show you an example here. And this is the equation that you see here on the top. In the middle in blue, there's an example. And if you look at the measured calcium, you say, oh, 8.5. Boy, my calcium's low, right? What's going on here? Well, if you look at your albumin, in this example, it's 3.0. So you've got low albumin. Well, then you run it through this calculator and you come up with 9.3 as your corrected calcium. You say, oh, 9.3 is in range. I don't have a calcium problem. I have an albumin problem. So something you want to look at. But just, again, your doctor should know this, should be looking at this, and hey, your albumin's low, we got to look at this. So take a look at that. And here's a link to an online calculator. Just a quick note, John Bilezikian says, hey, if it's above 4, he doesn't correct upwards or downwards or whatever, just if you have low albumin. Okay. All right, so let's talk about the calcium-related diseases that can lead to osteoporosis. All right, so back to our chart here. Here's Mike sitting at 9.7. Looks like it might be shifted a little bit more, and life is good, right? My parathyroid glands are working just fine. But what happens if one of those glands decides to swell up or overgrow? Right? And what happens is the cells, for whatever reasons, just say, hey, I'm going to start multiplying, right? It's kind of like a cancer. It can be cancerous, but typically they're not cancerous. It just grows too big. I guess they call it an adenoma. And what I'm going to show you here is a quick, let me just click here. And you can see that parathyroid gland, one of the glands, just starts growing. And the result of that is your calcium set point, that kind of happy point, gets shifted upwards. And in this example, you can see you have high calcium, your PTH will be high on your blood test. It's actually pretty easy to see this condition. And this is called hypercalcemic hyperparathyroidism. So if your calcium is high and your parathyroid hormone is high, you could very well have this problem. This is a very prevalent secondary cause of osteoporosis. Okay, so now let's say, all right, my happy point's at 8.9 or 9.0, and everything is working great. But you know what? Over the years, all of a sudden, you see your calcium kind of shifting up. So in this example, the parathyroid gland is growing. It's putting out too much PTH for your body. It's forcing that happy spot all the way up here at the top range, but it's not out of range. This is called normal calcemic hyperparathyroidism. So your PTH will be high, right? It'll be out of range, but your calcium is still in range. So this can happen. It's not as prevalent as the first example, but it can happen. So something else to be aware of. So how do we spot this, right? What are the numbers? Let's put some numbers to this. Well, this is a study of 16,000 patients that underwent parathyroidectomies. So, cut out the parathyroid gland, get the one gland out, the other 3 will be just fine. And these were the conditions for these patients. And you can see on the left-hand side there, the calcium, the kind of most prevalent number, the most popular number was around 10.7, 10.8, where these people said, hey, you've got a problem here, let's take out that parathyroid gland. So if your numbers are like at 11 or 12 or 13 or God forbid 14 or 15, I've heard of numbers that high, though they are extremely rare, you need to get that looked at, right? More than likely you have a parathyroid gland that's really out of control at that point. But however, that said, you can see in that green box, this is kind of the normal range on most blood tests. And again, it was, while your calcium was still normal, the parathyroid was high, and that's bad for bones, and they actually did surgery to remove the parathyroid gland. Now, if we look at the right-hand side, again, here's the people that underwent surgery. The PTH, it's, around 90 to 95 range. That was the most popular for this hyperparathyroidism. But numbers can be much higher than that, and it's like, wait, this is a pretty good indication. And even if your, let's say an example is your calcium's at 11 or 11.5, let's really throw it over there. But your parathyroid hormone is at 55, and hey, that's within range. What's going on here? Well, it still could be that your parathyroid gland is swollen because it's too high for what your calcium is, right? So they will operate on those people and pull that out, and your calcium drops back down in the normal range, okay? So this does happen. However, there can be other reasons for high calcium. There can be quite a few other reasons. But I wanted to show this one example, and Dr. Bilezikian, I put the link again at the bottom. You can watch him describe this. And unfortunately, he didn't put a whole lot of references, so I couldn't really look up the studies, so I'm a little bit hesitant to show this, but it's something we should all know about, right? Which is if your calcium is high, so this on the chart on the left-hand side, it says number of high calcium patients. So in this test population, they took, hey, you have high calcium, come over here, right? In 111 of those patients, 54% of those patients had surgically confirmed hyperparathyroid. So they had a gland that was too big, and all the P's on the right-hand side are the surgeries that happen to, fix the problem, so to speak. And you can see, if you kind of tear into this chart, you can see that there were some that had normal PTH, yet had high calcium that were operated on and, cured the problem. Okay, that said, there's another group here, and it's a pretty sizable group, where it's some sort of malignancy has caused this high calcium. And they show up much differently. If we look on the right-hand side, so the T here, the T's down here, the calcium is high, right? Starting at, say, 10.5, all the way up to 16, right? But the PTH is normal. The PTH is, even low. That could be caused by some sort of malignancy, some sort of cancer in your body, perhaps. I'm not saying you have cancer. Geez, that's why I hate even presenting this, but it's something you need to get looked into. But that said, it could just be that your vitamin D levels are way too high. Because remember, that will increase your calcium, your blood calcium, and your PTH will be low. So, that's another thing that kind of looks like this. And there can be other various reasons. So again, don't panic here by any means, but if you have high calcium, especially if it's in the 11s, you really need to take a look at that and see what the heck's going on. Okay. Hypercalciuria. This is my favorite one. Not really. And a lot of this information, actually all this information, comes from Dr. Fredric Coe. He's a fantastic guy. The guy's 87 years old. He's sharp as a tack. As a matter of fact, I just had a call with him for my condition, and he's helping me through. I'm one of those special cases with hypercalciuria. But your kidneys will, if you look at the left-hand side, your kidneys will filter your blood all day long, all the time, right? And it filters about 10 grams, right? 10,000 milligrams of calcium gets filtered in any one day through your kidneys. And the kidneys will filter it, and then it shoves it back into the bloodstream. But it doesn't get it all, right? You're going to have some that comes out. It's not 100% efficient. And typically, you might lose, say, 100 milligrams a day, right? If everything's working well. However, if you're losing numbers, and the numbers are down here, if you're a woman, about 250 milligrams a day, you're considered to have hypercalciuria, right? If you're male, it's 300 milligrams per day. And this is not a good thing for building bones. And let me show you that on the right-hand side here. So Dr. Coe has gone through and plotted a whole bunch of different patients, and yes, it's a pretty wide scatter plot, but what he's done is he's put some lines here as the average for these two groups. And the first group is for normals, right? The normals being the people that don't pee out over 250 milligrams per day. And what they found was, if you took less than, if you look at the chart here at the bottom, if you took less than about 800 milligrams per day of calcium, you were losing more calcium in your urine than you were absorbing through your intestines. And they can measure this. It's pretty wild how they measure how much calcium is coming out in your stool and how much is coming out in your urine and how much you're taking in your diet to get these numbers. But you can see for the average normal person, if you're not taking 800 milligrams, you're more than likely losing bone. And now if we look at the hypercalciurics, right? The red line there, man, it's really difficult to get to a point where you're not going to be losing bone. This is why you have to fix this, right? The gut can only absorb so much calcium in one day, and if you're peeing out more than you can absorb in, you're going to lose bone, period. So you've got to get this fixed, right? Medications aren't going to, or osteoporosis medications, right? All of the fancy ones, pick one. They're not going to work very well at all if you can't get this fixed. So how do you fix it, right? Okay, so I've had quite a bit of personal experience in this space here. And this chart was really good, and I'm working again with Dr. Coe, and this is Dr. Coe's chart. Unfortunately, he changed the colors here on me, but if you're a normal, right? If you're one of them, and let's say you're taking 4,600 milligrams per day of sodium, which by the way is like the average for the American diet, and it's really easy to get to 4,600 if you start reading labels and you like bread and pastas and such. So barbecue sauce, just about anything. Anyway, so let's say you're at 4,600. All right, well then your urine might creep up to closer to 200 milligrams per day. But if you can drop that down to say below 2,000, you can cut that down to say 100. All right, so here's a way for you to control your urine calcium. Now, if you're hypercalciuric, it's even a greater effect, right? If you go from 4,600 and let's say you're peeing out 400 milligrams per day, well, if you can bring that down to say 2,000, you might just cure your own hypercalciuria just from lowering sodium. And the reason why this happens is it has to do with how the kidney reclaims sodium. So let's say you're not taking very much sodium at all. All right, what will happen is, by the way, sodium is absorbed very well into your bloodstream. It's like 99% or a lot of it comes in. And your kidney will say, okay, well, Mike's not taking very much sodium. I need to reclaim more sodium. Well, when the kidney reclaims sodium, it can bring calcium with it. If you have too much sodium, your kidney says, hey, I'm going to flush out the sodium. I've got too much sodium. The calcium will go with it. So that's how this works. It's a pretty simple fix for a lot of people. So your doctor, if you're at this point at a nephrologist, they'll say, hey, first thing you got to do is cut your sodium way down. And they can see it on your urine test. So if you get a 24-hour urine, they'll look at the sodium. If you're eating a bunch of sodium, they're going to catch you. So make sure you regulate your sodium if you want this to work. Okay. Looking at your blood sodium levels, again, it's very much like calcium. It's very well controlled. It's not going to move very much at all. And by the way, it's really hard to get too little sodium in your diet. It can happen, but it's very difficult for that to happen. All right, so let's say you reduce your sodium, like I did, and bare minimum, and your urine calcium is too high. Well, the next step is going to be medication. And it's their special class of medications called thiazides or thiazide-like diuretics. And these work, again, with the kidneys. It has to do with the absorption of sodium and turning off these transporters so calcium comes in and sodium goes out and such like that. But that's kind of that next step, and there's various flavors and various doses of these medications, and I think I've been on all of them. So that's kind of that next step. But again, this is something you want to fix. You really have to fix for even your osteoporosis medications to work well. All right, so real quick, just a couple more slides left here. Let's talk about calcium supplements. I call this the can of worms. There's a lot of religion, there's a lot of marketing, there's a lot of money being made in this industry wrapped around calcium and the fear of osteoporosis and curing osteoporosis and everything else. So let me clear up some of the kind of misconceptions or misunderstandings that happen through here. All right, so this is a very technical diagram. Don't worry, there's no tests involved. On the left-hand side, we're in the yellow area there. This is a picture of your small intestines, and this is where the food ends up coming through here. So your small intestines, you got, broken down food coming through here, and the gray things here in the center, these are cells, the cells that line your small intestine, and they're all kind of pushed together. Now, what happens in your stomach is, regardless of how you take your calcium, whether you're taking calcium with food, whether you're taking calcium with citrate, whether you're taking calcium with carbonate or algae, or pick your component to go with it, it has to be separated before it can be absorbed through the gut, right, through the small intestine, the lining here, into your bloodstream. So I don't care what it is, what it's combined with, right, any special sauce or whatnot, it's got to get pulled apart before it can be absorbed in. And this happens in your stomach, right? You have hydrochloric acid and the food and all that type of stuff will help break that apart, and then it filters down through your small intestines and gets absorbed. So you don't eat a pizza and pizza comes into your bloodstream. No, it all gets broken down into these micro components before it gets absorbed into your bloodstream. Now, if you're taking something like calcium citrate, right? Calcium citrate doesn't require stomach acid to break those things apart, right? It's freely. You put the thing in water, they split apart. And so that's why calcium citrate, they say, you could take it with or without food. Pretty much all, if not all, matter of fact, I can't think of one that you can take without food and have really good absorption. So keep that in mind. That's why I say if you take it with a meal, regardless of what it is, it's going to do really well. It's going to absorb really well. I have a picture here to show that in a second. So a couple of things that get thrown around here that I hear a lot. It's like, no, Mike, I've got to take vitamin D with my calcium or the calcium won't absorb. Okay, no, right? You need 25 OH levels that are in a healthy range, that 30 to 50 range. So when your body says, hey, Mike needs to absorb more calcium, it can send out this 125 signal, and you see this in the drawing, right? That 125 OH vitamin D will suck in more calcium. It'll pass more calcium through the cells into your bloodstream, right? That's the signal that says, hey, Mike needs more calcium. It will also separate kind of the space between these cells and let more calcium squeak in between the cells. To get into the bloodstream. This is the action of that vitamin D. You don't need to take the calcium with the vitamin D. As a matter of fact, this can get you into trouble. I got into this trouble where I wanted to take a multivitamin, and the multivitamin that I wanted to take had D in it. Well, the calcium that I was taking, which was Citracal, also had vitamin D in it. And it's like it was too much. So it started pushing me out of that sweet spot. So I had to find a calcium that didn't have vitamin D in it. And if you've ever tried that, it's kind of difficult to do. But I found it. And that's what I'm taking now to get my vitamin D levels in the right range. Okay, so what about hydroxyapatite, right? MCH, MCHA, MCHC, whatever. And the pitch on that is, well, if you're losing bone, you're losing both calcium and phosphorus, right? You're losing hydroxyapatite, which is calcium and phosphorus. So therefore, you should take calcium with phosphorus together, this hydroxyapatite MCH type of product. Again, when it hits the stomach, it'll break it apart, right? It can't come in together. It's got to get broken apart, and it'll come in as calcium, it'll come in as phosphorus, and it'll end up in your bloodstream. Okay, so you think, all right, well, it still makes sense, right? I'm losing phosphorus because, the bones are being churned up. Well, the problem is with this is the typical diet has a lot of phosphorus, right? And that's why you don't really hear much about, oh, you need to take phosphorus. As a matter of fact, if you have some sort of chronic kidney disease, they say, hey, stop taking so much phosphorus. This is hard on your kidneys. So again, if you need phosphorus, right, then hey, this might be an easy way to get phosphorus, into your stomach or into your bloodstream if you don't get enough in your diet. But again, a lot of foods have a lot of phosphorus in it, and that's why you don't see that being pushed. Let's talk about one more, right? I've heard people say, geez, Mike, there's this calcium on the market where if I take it, it's going to build my bones, right? They have this study. It says you don't need to take osteoporosis medications, just take my special calcium and you're going to be okay. And sure enough, they have studies that show that every year, right, they have like a 7-year study, and every year they're gaining 1% in bone mineral density, and that's really good. Instead of losing BMD, you're gaining BMD, and 7% over 7 years is pretty darn good. So here's the catch on some of this stuff. And in this one particular company, they have a couple different flavors of this calcium, mix that they have. And they have one that has strontium in it. And that's the one that they have this clinical trial done on that increased BMD. But one thing the study didn't show, at least not that I saw, is that it reduces your risk of fracture, right? It isn't necessarily making your bones stronger. It shows up on a DEXA scan as being more dense. But here's the thing, strontium has twice the molecular mass of calcium. And the strontium is being replaced in your bone. It's replacing the calcium in your bone. And then when you do the DEXA scan, it shows up as being more dense. So it's not necessarily adding more strength. And as a matter of fact, I might argue that, hey, your body needs calcium. When there's a calcium alarm and it needs calcium from your bones and it's pulling strontium out, it's probably not going to be a very good thing here. So I don't know for sure, but there's a lot of controversy around strontium. I can tell you of all the trainings that I've gone to, and I've gone to a bunch of them, right? The World Congress of Osteoporosis just this year, 2024, went to last year's as well, and the European osteoporosis seminars that they have. And this is where doctors are training doctors. None of them are talking about strontium. I'm not saying it doesn't work. I'm just saying that there's not a whole lot of good evidence out there that it's going to help prevent a lot of fractures at this point. Okay, so take that for what it's worth. And I'm going to stop there, right? Again, if you have osteoporosis and you're thinking, I'm just going to move to this different type of calcium, I've been taking the wrong calcium all this time, it's not going to work for you, right? Best case, if you were low, if you weren't taking calcium, you're taking calcium now, regardless of what it is, you should hopefully stop losing bone mineral density, at least for a little while, right, before age gets you again and you'll start coming down. But it's not going to cure your osteoporosis. It's almost guaranteed not to do that, right? If you want to take a year and try it, hey, fine. Keep an eye on your T-scores because you don't want to break something in the meantime. It's probably good anyway. That way you can equalize your vitamin D. You got your calcium, right? You're doing your studying and understanding things, and you get another DEXA scan done to see how you're doing. And then you're ready to do some sort of medication at that point. Okay. All right, so here's a study. It's not a very good study, unfortunately. It's hard to find good studies on this. But in this case, they took 10 young, healthy males. Sorry, not a good study. And what they did is they had them fast overnight, so 12 hours of fasting. And the first thing in the morning, they said, okay, here's 1,000 milligrams of calcium. And they had 4 different combinations. They had calcium citrate, calcium carbonate, tricalcium phosphate, and calcium gluconate. That's a mouthful. And they said, okay, here, take this, and then fast, again, continue to fast for 6 hours. And what they did is every 30 minutes, they took a blood calcium reading, right? Let's measure your blood calcium, see how much it comes up. And let's look at your PTH and see how far it goes down. And you can see PTH right away. When you take calcium, within minutes, the PTH starts to drop. Okay, if we look back on the left here, calcium citrate absorbed the best, right? It influenced the blood calcium levels the most, and it also influenced the PTH the most, right? It reduced it because it said, hey, I've got calcium, I don't need to send out as much PTH, so the PTH drops. And, here's proof that calcium citrate works really well. Okay, the problem with this test is they didn't take it with a meal. If they had taken this with a meal, all of these bars would be pretty much right on top of each other. Because again, calcium will be torn apart, whether it's calcium carbonate, calcium citrate, right, calcium phosphate. They all get torn apart and they all get absorbed the same way into the gut when it goes into the bloodstream. Now, I have seen, I did find one that was calcium carbonate versus calcium citrate when taken with a meal, and they were right on top of each other. I just don't have that data for all these other different combinations, so there's a little bit of a leap of faith here, but you can believe me. And if you don't, do your own research as far as this goes. But they all pretty much absorb the same and really well as long as you take it with food. All right, home stretch here. Last slide, just a quick recap. 4 different points to stress to bring home. Make sure you got this right. Calcium and vitamin D is necessary if you have osteoporosis. Try to get about 1,200 milligrams of calcium a day, and that's in your food and supplements. And spread it out throughout the day, right? Adjust your vitamin D levels, right, by taking vitamin D, the right number of IUs, to get your range in that 30 to 50 range, your 25 OH vitamin D. Do check, right? Make sure if your calcium levels are too high and your PTH is high, well, that might be some indication of a hyperparathyroidism. So you want to check into that, right? Take a look at those levels. For sure, if you haven't had it done yet, get it done, period. There's no way around this. You have to, well, you don't have to, but you absolutely should test your 24-hour urine for calcium to make sure you're not peeing out too much calcium, because that will cause osteoporosis. And then finally, on the supplement thing, again, the price tag on some of these calcium supplements is crazy, right? And some of them have a really good mix of magnesium and calcium and vitamin D and boron and whatever other elements are necessary for bone building. Really good combinations, but they don't have to be taken at the same time, right? If you take a multivitamin that's got all that other stuff in it, well then you could just take calcium, right, supplement, and you're good to go. Okay. But again, for convenience, 1 pill, fantastic. If you're not getting it, right, I eat a handful of nuts every day. That gets me a lot of those minerals that are necessary for bone building. So anyway. All right, with that said, I know that was a long time. I appreciate you sticking with me. And if you have any questions, I will stick around for as long as you have questions. So thank you very much.